In the cold mists of the 13th century, when the age of the Crusades still echoed through Christendom, a new war was being prepared, not in the burning sands of Jerusalem, but in the frozen forests of the north. There, beyond the Vistula, where pagan shrines smoldered beneath oak trees and rivers ran thick with ice, the Teutonic Order found its destiny. They came not as kings or merchants, but as monks in mail, bound by oath, by discipline, and by a vision of a holy frontier. They called themselves the Ordo Teutonicus, brothers of the German house of St. Mary in Jerusalem, soldiers of Christ who traded the desert's dust for the snows of Prussia. What began as a mission of faith soon became the birth of a state. The Prussians, fierce tribes of amber traders and forest warriors, had long resisted the southern faith. They worshipped their own gods, Pacunas of thunder, Potrimpo of water, and Velnias of the underworld. The forests were their cathedrals, their rivers sacred. To them, the cross was not salvation, but invasion. Yet in the courts of Europe, such defiance was seen as heathen darkness. Papal bulls proclaimed crusade, a northern holy war. The Teutonic knights answered, their black crosses gleaming against white cloaks, their banners stitched with Latin scripture and the iron promise of divine order. They marched under snow and silence, carrying relics and swords with equal reverence. Each fortress they built became both monastery and bastion, prayer above, armory below. The first stones of their empire rose upon the Vistula's banks, Thorn, Kulm, Elbing, outposts of faith in a land of frost. Timber palisades gave way to stone citadels, and the wilderness began to bear the mark of discipline. Within decades, the landscape was transformed, rivers diverted, roads hewn through forest, churches crowned where totems once stood. But the conversion of Prussia did not come by sermon alone. From the marshes and pines, the Prussian tribes fought back, ambushing convoys, burning chapels, vanishing into the wild. Their war was not one of open battle but of resistance, of pride and endurance. The knights responded with the only language they knew, methodical conquest. Campaign by campaign, they advanced, each season a measured strike. When the rivers froze, they rode across them like roads. When summer returned, they burned and rebuilt. The order's discipline became legend, every sword stroke part of a divine geometry, every victory inscribed as providence. They took captives, baptized them by the dozens, and set them to work, building the very fortresses that replaced their villages. Crosses replaced idols, bells replaced drums, and where old gods had been whispered to in the woods, the Latin Mass rose like smoke through stained glass. By mid-century, the order's authority stretched from the Vistula to the Niemen. They were no longer just crusaders. They were rulers, architects of a theocratic empire. The Grand Master ruled not only as abbot, but as prince. Knights became governors, priests became judges. A strict code bound every man: poverty, chastity, obedience, and war. They called their new dominion Ordensstaat, the state of the Teutonic Order, a realm of stone castles and iron faith, where the sword and the rosary shared the same scabbard. From their capital at Marienburg, the order forged one of the mightiest fortresses in Europe. Walls of red brick rising from the Nogat River, towers crowned with banners that snapped in the Baltic wind. Within its walls, silence ruled, broken only by the sound of prayer, the ring of hammers, and the call to arms. The Order's empire was a paradox of its age, pious yet ruthless, monastic yet imperial. To the Church, it was a triumph of faith. To the pagan tribes, it was conquest in the name of heaven. And yet, beneath the veneer of devotion, the seeds of power had taken root. The Order taxed merchants, minted coin, and drew settlers from across the Holy Roman Empire. German towns sprouted in Prussian soil, their markets busy with traders from Lübeck and Danzig. Christianity brought not only salvation but the machinery of commerce, law, and bureaucracy. In time, the crusade became colonization. By the end of the century, the old Prussian tongue had begun to fade. Children spoke German in the market squares. Pagan rites vanished into memory, absorbed by liturgy and legend. The last great uprisings were crushed beneath the hooves of armored cavalry. Where once the forest spirits had ruled, now stood churches of stone and stained glass, their bells tolling over fields tamed by the plough. The land was conquered not only by sword, but by silence, the silence of centuries of obedience. Yet the price of empire was never small. The Teutonic knights, once servants of God, had become stewards of dominion. Their zeal hardened into pride, their faith into governance. They saw themselves as the mailed hand of providence, a people chosen to civilize by conquest. But even as they stood triumphant, the horizon darkened. New powers stirred, Lithuania, Poland, and the restless nobles of Europe who watched with envy the wealth of the Baltic trade. The monastic empire built on the frozen soil of devotion would soon find itself beset by the same forces that had once made it great: ambition, faith, and the unrelenting hunger for control. For now, though, in the candlelight of their great halls, the knights of the Teutonic Order believed their dominion eternal. Their chronicles spoke of divine favor, their prayers echoed through the corridors of Marienburg like the measured steps of destiny. And in the stillness of night, when the snows blanketed their walls and the rivers froze beneath the stars, it seemed, for a moment, that they had indeed built God's kingdom upon the earth. But kingdoms of iron and faith seldom last forever. The order that once brought the cross to the pagan north would, in time, fall before the same tides of history it had unleashed. Its castles would become ruins, its banners relics, yet its legend would endure, woven into the myth of Europe itself, a story of faith and fire, of empire born from prayer and ambition. The Teutonic Order had raised more than walls and churches. It had built an idea. And ideas, unlike empires, do not crumble in the frost.